The Freemasons say, look to the east, meaning look for knowledge and enlightenment because the sun always rises in the east. But American right-wingers have also been looking to the east, specifically to Hungary as a model for their own movement there. CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Committee, recently held a gathering in Budapest for the fourth consecutive time, with the country's Prime Minister Viktor Orban delivering a keynote speech. Orban and America's MAGA right see themselves as part of that same coalition. Orban said in his speech, quote, "The Trump tsunami swept through the entire world. We are no longer suffocating in the woke sea," end quote. With his nationalist rhetoric and his embrace of culture wars, it's easy to see why the American right adores Orban and sees him as a blueprint for politics here at home. Orban has transformed Hungary since returning to office in 2010 in ways that parallel early moves by the new Trump administration. He's fired huge numbers of public employees. He eroded democratic checks on his power. He suffocated independent journalism. His party has amended the Constitution and taken control of the courts. Orban is NATO's longest-serving leader, and with elections set for next year, while there always appears to be a political movement consolidating against him, there's no real indication that he's likely to lose his grip on power anytime soon. And that last bit is the key. Orban hasn't canceled elections. He's not ever declared Hungary a dictatorship. He's built a competitive authoritarian state where democratic infrastructure still exists, but has been rendered unfair. And he's done it by marginalizing dissent and reorganizing the country's institutions to serve him. Technically, anyone can run for office in Hungary, but Orban's party has made it harder for his opposition to win seats or raise money. Campaigns have a hard time getting covered in the news because nearly 80% of Hungary's media market is controlled by Orban-friendly oligarchs, according to Reporters Without Borders. But the whole thing is wrapped in plausible deniability, which allows Hungary to remain a member of NATO and the European Union. Kevin Roberts, the architect of Project 2025 and president of the Heritage Foundation, called Orban's Hungary, quote, "Modern Hungary is not just a model for conservative statecraft, but the model." The right is always looking to the east, so maybe we should too. Joining me now is the Pulitzer Prize-winning historian Anne Applebaum. She's a staff writer at The Atlantic, a senior fellow at the Johns Hopkins Agora Institute, a multidisciplinary academic and public person dedicated to strengthening global democracy. She's the author of numerous books, including Autocracy, Inc., Dictators Who Want to Run the World. Anne, welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
The NPR had a report from Hungary where they spoke to a prominent journalist who heads a journalism school in a university in Budapest. And he was saying, he said, quote, "There is only one thing that is needed to separate Viktor Orban from power, and that is a relative majority of Hungarians voting for someone else other than him. That's all that's needed. And as long as that's the case, how can you speak of an autocracy?" It's not as simple as that in Hungary.
No, it very much isn't as simple as that. And I would also say that in your excellent introduction, you left out a couple of really important things to understand about Hungary. One is that it's become much poorer, and it's also become much more corrupt. And the way that money works in Hungary is actually frightening. Hungary was a most promising member of the former communist world 20 years ago. Now it's either, depending on how you count, the poorest or the second poorest country in the EU. It's also a country where a very small group of companies has privileged access to the state, to state money, to contracts. All of those companies have somehow links to Orban. You mentioned also in your introduction that many of them control the media. They control other institutions. You know, what Orban has done is tilted the playing field so that a few companies, the ones owned by his son-in-law or by his friends, have an advantage over the others. He's eliminated most of the media, and he's working on actually eliminating the rest. Maybe we can talk about that. There's a new law coming up in the next very soon, which is designed to help do that. He's tilted the courts. He's repeatedly rewritten the Constitution to give him and his party all kinds of advantages. So he actually doesn't win majorities in elections, but the way the Constitution is written, he somehow has a majority in Parliament afterwards. People who have dared to be his opponents run into all kinds of trouble. They lose their jobs. They're harassed. They're followed in the street. I was actually in Budapest not that long ago and met people who are part of a new opposition movement against him, and they really tell horror stories. So it's a it's increasingly a system that is a kind of fake democracy. So there's the appearance of democracy, but behind it, the systems are very hollow. And as I said, the people who suffer from it most are the Hungarians.
What's the thing that American conservatives are enchanted with? Is it the system that you just described, or is it the underlying politics? Because Orban is an ethno-nationalist. Orban is anti-immigrant. Orban is anti-gay rights and things like that. So in other words, there are 2 points of intersection here. Are they both working with American conservatives, or is it the idea that this guy knows how to control a society?
So I do think it's both. I think you're right. One of them is that Orban has successfully used culture wars to cover up other problems. So Hungarian politics is all about immigrants who, in fact, in Hungary don't exist. I mean, there isn't an immigration problem in Hungary. Or threats from, some kind of gender ideology that doesn't really exist there either, but has given him the excuse to take over universities, for example, and to destroy academic programs. And he's used those to hide the fact that, as I say, Hungary's getting poorer, Hungarian healthcare system is getting worse. Hungarian emigration, Hungarians leaving the country is a very high number. Educated Hungarians don't want to stay there. And so the culture war is used as a kind of smokescreen to hide the country's real problems and prevent people from discussing or debating them. And of course, then the other thing Orban has done that I'm afraid a part of the American right admires is set up a political system within which he never loses. He doesn't ever pay a price. He doesn't lose an election. He's so manipulated the public sphere and so manipulated the electoral system that it's very, very hard, if not impossible, to beat him. I mean, I should say there is another opposition leader who right now is polling better than he is. And the question is, will that person really be allowed to stand, and would he really be allowed to win? And again, when I was in Budapest a month or two ago, that was the debate. We don't know whether a real opposition party would be allowed to win or whether he would be blocked.
And these are interesting comparisons. You can use Turkey as an example. You can use India as an example, where there are movements, there are frustrations. If you spend your time in Budapest, you'll think nobody likes Orban, and then you realize that, the rest of the country he sweeps overwhelmingly. So these are interesting challenges, that democracy still exists, and yet Orban doesn't lose. And much to discuss here. Thank you for joining us, as always, and thank you for your great writing on this. Anne Applebaum is a staff writer at The Atlantic, a senior fellow at Johns Hopkins Agora Institute, and the author of numerous books, including Autocracy, Inc., Dictators Who Want to Run the World.